Our topic for today is strengthening your partnerships with VRS, SSB, and schools. As a reminder for how these trainings will be structured, they will be broken into two parts. The first half will be recorded, and that recording will be made available on the Disability Hub as a resource for all case managers. In that first part, we'll cover some of the more general information that applies to all case managers, whether you're a liaison or not. We know that for both the liaisons who are here today and the case managers who are watching this recording later, everyone has a different level of background knowledge when it comes to E1MN. This presentation will not be focused on E1MN basics, although we will do a quick review of just a couple basic concepts towards the start to make sure everyone's on the same page. We'll start out with some overall strategies for forming strong partnerships. Then we'll talk about some key collaboration points for both adults and youth. On the youth side, we'll also review some of the transition services available to youth and ways to get involved with things like IEP meetings. After that, we'll stop the recording, and we'll get into some of the information that liaisons in particular need to know when it comes to this topic of strengthening partnerships. We'll review the role of the liaison here, share some resources, and have an opportunity for a bit of discussion, too. My name is Cole Sorensen, and I'm a young white person with short dark hair and glasses. I am the E1MN coordinator at DHS. I do a lot of the coordination of our efforts, and a big part of my role is being a point of contact for technical assistance and just general support for all of you around E1MN. Beth, our benefits planning coordinator, wasn't able to make it today, so I'll pass it to Christy now.
Hi everyone, I'm Christy Howe. I'm a middle-aged white woman with kind of chin length, brown and gray hair, wearing a cozy gray fleece and glasses. I'm the employment first lead here at DHS, so I'm kind of the subject matter expert and kind of drive our strategic initiative within DHS, and then also with our E1MN partners, I work closely with them. Shauna?
Hi, my name is Shauna Olson. I am a young white female with long brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a light brown colored sweater. And I am a grant manager, and I work with employment and family grants.
No matter the situation, there are a few general strategies and best practices that can strengthen any partnership. First is communicating proactively, rather than just reactively. By this, we mean, don't wait until there's a problem before you start communicating with your partners. And in many cases, problems can be avoided or at least minimized by early communication. As an example, I know one pretty common area of friction for teams is meeting scheduling and attendance. I'm sure a lot of you, as case managers, have calendars that quickly get booked up several weeks in advance, if not further, and you might not always be able to make it to meetings like VRS employment plan meetings or school IEP meetings if you don't get enough advance notice, which can lead to some real tension or frustration for everyone involved. In a situation like that, proactive communication might look like reaching out to the VR counselor right away when someone is getting ready to start VRS services, or to the student's IEP case manager right at the beginning of the school year, and making sure they have your contact info, letting them know you'd really like to be involved with meetings if possible, and giving them a heads up that having at least however much advance notice will make it more likely you can attend. Proactive communication does help things go smoother, but even with the best communication, there may still be times where disagreements happen. There's a lot of work being done to align our systems and clarify processes as part of our E1MN initiatives, but it's work that takes time. And when you run into one of those situations where policies or practices don't align between one agency and another, or when there's confusion over roles or funding sources, that can lead to some tough conversations. Even just differences in personality or communication styles can lead to that, too. In those moments, it's really important to try to bring the focus back to that common goal that everyone at the table shares, wanting to support the person in their employment journey and create an experience that's as seamless as possible for them. Often, an effective way to do that is to just make sure that person's voice is heard as part of the discussion. Because when everyone at the table has a different idea in their head about what's best for the person, it can be hard to come to consensus about what needs to happen. But when that person has a chance to share for themselves what they want and need, it gives the rest of the team a clear goal that they can then work towards together. And finally, having a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities of everyone on the team is really important for those strong partnerships, too, especially when it comes to some of those key collaboration points that require coordination between different agencies. So, with that, let's do a little bit of a recap of general roles and responsibilities, and then look at a few of those key collaboration points. I'll pass it to Christy.
Thanks, Cole. So when we started working together as E1MN, one thing we heard was some confusion about roles and who does what on a person's team. So to help with that, we created this graphic and outlined the roles and responsibilities on the in the Hub Work Toolkit. So the graphic on this screen shows a Venn diagram with the person at the center and then all the other team members of the employment team arranged around that person. So noticing that the person is at the center of that, they're always the focus. Sorry, I'm using just my laptop today and I am struggling with notifications. Okay, so the person, they're the focus of the team. Everyone is coming around them to support them with their goals, including their employment goal. So their role is to share their goals and interests, and then we all kind of do what we can to support them. Families and guardians, their role is to support the person in the decision-making process, help coordinate supports, attend meetings, provide signatures, in the case of minors or people under guardianship. And then, as you know, the waiver case manager helps the people identify, access, and navigate supports and services. So responsible for providing the information a person needs to make informed choice about supports and services, including employment, also health, social, education, financial services. So the VOC rehab staff, and state services for the blind counselors help people with disabilities who have barriers to employment find jobs. The role of the VR counselor looks a little bit different based on if the person's a student or an adult. Either way, they help the person identify their work goals and make connections with resources and services to help find and keep a job. And the employment service providers are the ones who do both of those, who help provide the services that VR and employment plan and the waiver support plan are assigned to them. And then schools, they are the special education teachers and school case managers, and they help students plan and prepare for future success. That includes thinking about employment, introducing the idea of work, teaching the skills that people need to succeed at work. They also, maintaining the IEPs, support transition planning, and guiding work experiences and career and technical education. So there's more information on the hub about all of this, but what's the most important thing is to keep in mind is that everyone's supporting the person. We're all collaborating and communicating and working together as part of E1MN. So this is the Engage, Plan, Find, Keep framework for adult employment services, specifically for adults on waivers in Minnesota. Before E1N and in the early days, there's a lot of confusion about who paid for what services and what was covered under each service. When did it start? When did it end? How do you move from one stage to the next? And then who paid for what? So here is, you can see each service, what the outcomes are and who pays for it.
On screen is a graphic of Engage, Plan, Find, Keep framework for adults, showing the waiver as primary funding source in the Engage, Plan, and Keep phase, and VRS SSB as primary funding source in Find phase.
Like I mentioned, Disability Hub has a lot of resources that dig into this a bit more. So we won't spend too much time on this slide. So do you want to go to the next one? Thank you. So one of the more frequent topics that come up is communication between case managers and VR. This is a really critical point element to the streamlining of the employment process. So we've got a few key times listed here. So kind of having that good communication when you or the person served have any questions, when you need to coordinate services, when the person's ready to start the VR referral for the find stage. And there's a few different ways you can do this. You can like reach out to the VR counselor assigned to the person if there is one, or you can reach out to the VR liaison for your county. And we'll talk more about the VR liaisons in a little bit, but best recommendation is to communicate early and often. So, you know, those points of transition are always the times that we need to have the best communication. So Plan to Find is one of them. So the work toolkit on the hub has a section focused on supporting people on waivers. This is roughly what it says about the case manager role during the Find to Keep transition. So again, the goal is a seamless transition for the person. So we're wanting to make sure there's just good communication all around between case managers and VR and the providers, like, you know, hoping that we're doing the work and the person serves really not experiencing a lot of tension or turmoil or delay during this. So we just need to make sure the person's connected to VR early enough that the VR intake and the find authorization are in place when the person's done with discovery and ready to start that job search. So a couple notes about this slide. It mentions the common referral form, and that is more of a communication tool used during the referral process. It's not what starts the official referral within VR. And then the recommendation is to start that formal referral process at least 30 days before the plan stage is completed. And we also have a note about MyVault. This is a really good tool to encourage people to use, where they can store and share their employment documents, referral forms with everyone on their team. But, you know, people don't have to use it, but we do kind of encourage it as a good communication tool between everyone. So the Find to Keep is also a pretty crucial point to maintaining that job and stability, success, having streamlined staffing. So staying up to date on the status of the job search is pretty important, and the conversations about stability when person is approaching stability so that you can arrange employment support services. And we know, you know, the time it takes to get all of that in place. So that's in part why it's so crucial to have that good communication. So you have enough time to do that, to coordinate the intake meeting. And we want to make sure that VR is at that as well. And ideally, the person's working with a dual enrolled provider and everything's been planned out ahead of time, that they'll do find and then the ongoing support. So there's not that gap or that kind of stress point of finding a new provider. And then just one thing to keep in mind, VR provides that job counseling until the person is stable on their job. And that point is specific to each person. It's not for a certain number of days. It's just when the team's determined that they're stable. So it's important to have that good ongoing communication once they get a job. I'll hand it to Cole now.
Okay.
Let's transition now into talking a bit more about services for youth and your partnership with schools. Just as a quick review of the Engage Plan Find Keep framework as it applies to youth, the phases are the same, but there are some differences in who provides those services. School and VR transition and pre-employment transition services are the primary funding source for Engage, Plan and Find phase for youth. However, in the Keep phase, the waiver may come into play. If a student has a job during school hours and needs support in the job, school transition services provide that support. But if the student has a job outside of school hours, like in the evenings or weekends, waiver employment support services can provide that. When we talk about transition services for youth, employment is an important part of that, but definitely not the only part. We heard from youth and families that they had trouble knowing who was on the youth support team and who did what. That transition programs were inconsistent, or they had to repeat the same things or activities over and over, and that in general they didn't know what to expect. We also heard from professionals that they didn't know what transition services or supports were available to youth, what the process looked like, who pays for what, and who they should be connecting or collaborating with. We created the Minnesota Youth in Transition framework to help address that. On the screen is a graphic that shows the youth at the center, surrounded by 4 circles that read, Best Life, Employment, Post-Secondary Education and Training, and Interdependent Living, which are all learning expectations that should be addressed during transition planning. And surrounding all that are the 3 key elements of the framework, which are learning expectations, shared practices, and guiding principles. While today's training is not going to get super in-depth on the transition framework, we do have a link on the slide there to a page where you can read more about it. This tool is something that can really help teams strengthen their partnerships. The guiding principles include things like, the youth is at the center of transition planning, high expectations matter, and families play a key role in successful transition outcomes. These common values can help professionals ground their partnerships in working towards the same goals. The shared practices help create a more consistent youth planning process based in collaboration and person-centered principles. And then the learning outcomes help professionals make sure that the services they are providing are comprehensive and address all those areas of a person's life. If you're not already familiar with the framework, we encourage you to check out that link to learn more. There are several different transition services available for youth. Waiver services are often an important part of this, but I assume you all are already plenty familiar with waiver services, so I don't need to review those. A lot of transition services for youth are provided by schools. For all youth, whether they have a disability or not, they will get some degree of support with things like career and post-secondary exploration. But for students in special education, their transition needs are required to be addressed in their IEP starting in the 9th grade, and schools can provide a wide variety of transition services related to post-secondary education and training, employment, community participation, recreation, and leisure and home living. Provide transition services for youth. These are available to all youth with disabilities between the ages of 14 and 21, even if they are not in special education. Pre-employment transition services, also called PREETs, includes 5 required activities, which are job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, post-secondary education counseling, workplace readiness training, and instruction in self-advocacy. If you want to learn more about these services or the policies surrounding them, you can check out the link on the slide for the Youth in Transition Toolkit page on the basics. For students in special education, it's required to have an IEP meeting at least once a year, although they may happen more frequently if needed. When it comes to transition-aged students, so students in 9th grade or above, these meetings are an extremely important collaboration point when it comes to transition planning, including employment planning. We know that you as case managers often have a lot on your plate, and scheduling can be challenging, but we do highly encourage you to attend IEP meetings for the youth on your caseload whenever possible. Typically, the student's IEP case manager at the school will be the one to handle sending out invitations, although the youth and their family can choose to invite anyone else to the meeting who they'd like to be there. If you have a transition-aged youth on your caseload who you know receives special education services, but you don't typically get invited to their IEP meetings, it may be good to let the youth and their family know that you'd be willing to start attending meetings, why that would be beneficial, and you can offer to connect with or share contact information with the school staff so that you can coordinate. You can play several key roles when attending IEP meetings. It means that you can collaborate in transition planning, where the full team can work with the youth to identify strengths and needs, and coordinate what services can meet those needs. Look for ways that waiver services can complement or build on the skills they are working on at school, for instance. You also play a role in tracking progress. Waiver case managers get regular updates from the youth, waiver service providers, and other team members on the youth's progress. As the youth's needs change, they update the waiver support plan and services accordingly. And finally, you will play an extremely important role in coordinating the continuation of services as the youth approaches graduation, to make sure that they're set up to be successful during that transition and that it goes as smoothly as possible. Let's look a little more at what that looks like, in particular on the employment side of things. Starting to plan as early as possible for a student's graduation and that transition from services provided through the school to services provided through a waiver sets them up for success and a much smoother experience. At a minimum, we recommend these conversations start happening at the beginning of the student's last year in school, but earlier is always better. For employment, one early step to take is identifying the phase a student is currently in, whether that's engage, plan, find, or keep. This could of course change as they get closer to graduating, but you should keep the discussion open and continue checking in on where the student is at. You'll also want to start discussing what waiver services the person will need authorized once they graduate, and take steps to ensure a smooth transition with as small a gap as possible in between school services ending and waiver services kicking in. Although, one caveat to that is follow the youth's lead on that, too. For some youth, they'll want to keep working on their employment goals and don't want to lose their momentum. But I remember that at least for me, back when I graduated, the biggest thing I wanted was one last summer break, a few months to enjoy being young for just a little while longer before starting up a new routine of college and work. Find out from the youth and their family what kind of transition makes the most sense to them, and then plan your timing based on that. If a student is approaching graduation and is still in the engage or plan phase, there may need to be a little extra discussion to determine who will provide those services once they leave school. As we discussed, for students enrolled in high school or a transition program, engage and plan phase services are provided by schools and VRS or SSB, not by waivers, whereas for adults, services in these phases are provided through the waiver. Once the youth graduates, they would be able to start receiving waiver employment exploration or development services. However, that may not be the right route for everyone. Say there's a student in school who's still in the engage or plan phase, and they've been receiving services from VRS or SSB that have been going well and they've been making good progress. It might be pretty disruptive to that youth to then have to transition over to waiver employment services as soon as they graduate, only to potentially transition back to VRS or SSB in a few months' time when they're ready to find a job. The goal of E1MN is to create a seamless experience for people as they move between their programs, and we want to avoid bouncing people between services. In this specific situation, where a student graduates while still in the engage or plan phase, there is a little flexibility where either the youth could start receiving waiver employment services, or VRS or SSB can potentially continue providing those services even after they leave school. It's important for teams to come to clear agreements on who will provide the services once the youth graduates rather than assuming. And the focus should always be on the person and how to meet their needs in as seamless a way as possible.
On screen is a screenshot of the My Vault account website.
For both youth and adults, a way we can build a more seamless system is to leverage tools to share information and collaborate. A tool that has been developed to help with this is the Vault. The Vault, also called My Vault, is a secure, personal account where you and the people you support can do these activities, securely store them and other documents, like benefit information, support plans, employment plans, and individual education plans, and share them with people on their team. You can create contacts and teams in My Vault, so you can share files easily and securely. It creates a way for the person to have their own information electronically, that they can access anytime they need it. It also gives you as support professionals a place for collaboration. Contacts and information can be shared easily and securely. With the My Vault account, a person can complete employment activities as well as store and share relevant documents with their employment support team. This helps support professionals coordinate and deliver employment services that meet the person's needs. We have some links on the slide where you can learn more about how you can use My Vault to support people, as well as how to create a My Vault account, add contacts, and share files. That brings us to the end of the recorded portion of today's training. We can go ahead and stop the recording now, and I'll pass it to Christy to start talking more about your role as liaison in strengthening partnerships.